Sometimes it's assumed that in this day and age of so much information flow and so much technology that it's impossible to keep a secret. But we have our exceptions, and this one is a blockbuster of mammoth proportions in college football. The landscape has changed way beyond what anyone predicted. Reports confirmed in the last hour, Lincoln Riley leaving Oklahoma, going to USC. The USC coaching search has been going on now for a couple months, and Lincoln Riley has not been mentioned by any source that I've seen, but Lincoln Riley confirmed to USC. We got our guy Matt Zemek on the line. You got to check out his work on Trojans Wire. Matt is so kind to join us each and every Tuesday to break down what has been the USC coaching search, the Pac-12 landscape, and the nation. Matt, how you doing today?
I am blown away. And I wrote a few Bruce Feldman floated the rumor USC could take a swing at Lincoln Riley. That rumor floated very early Sunday afternoon, late morning in Los Angeles. I wrote a couple pieces just laughing at it because on its face, it's absurd. Because if you think about it, Mark, Oklahoma had been going into Southern California recruiting from USC's backyard, taking advantage of Clay Helton's weakness, failing to lock down the larger Southern California area for one recruit after another. Been writing about it, been covering it. My partners at Sooners Wire, also at the College Wire Network for Gannett, had been making note of it. Malachi Nelson, Gentry Williams. Lincoln Riley was going into Southern California, bringing guys to Oklahoma. And you also look at Oklahoma. I mean, obviously an elite job. Lincoln Riley is part of a lineage at Oklahoma. Great young coaches, Bud Wilkinson, Barry Switzer, Bob Stoops, then Riley, all hired when under 40 years of age, and all became rock star coaches. Lincoln Riley certainly on his way to having a Hall of Fame career, with everything that he's done at OU, coming in as Bob Stoops' offensive coordinator, and then, of course, as head coach. Joe Castiglione, one of the best ADs in the business. Like, you don't leave that job unless you go to like the Dallas Cowboys or a prime NFL franchise. You don't leave that job, unless you want to retire the way Bob Stoops did. Drinking tequila and just having a grand old time. Leave that job for USC, where Saturday night, I don't know if you know this, but I wrote about it at Trojans Wire. President Carol Folt mistakenly tweeted that the season was over. USC has that makeup game against Cal next week. So she forgot about it, and she tweeted out, "Well, thanks for a great season. See you next year." And she didn't, she deleted the tweet. And so, oh wait, you're going to leave Oklahoma for that? And so, the idea of a Lincoln Riley to USC, especially after all the LSU rumors got shot down, and that was proved to be, smoke and mirrors. Like, okay, if Riley's not going to LSU, he's certainly not going to USC. Like, really? Who would believe it? So, hey, was I wrong to laugh at the Lincoln Riley rumor? Yeah, I was wrong. But it's not something that I'm going to professionally regret. It's not something I'm going to apologize for, because no one had this. No one had this. It was quiet. It was under the radar. And the big plot twist, Mark, here's like the real delicious plot twist here, is that, the sense was late Friday, early Saturday, that because Matt Campbell would not be coaching in the Big 12 championship game, he was available. He could do interviews. He would be lined up. Mike Bohn could talk to him directly. And so the plot twist is, well, Mike Bohn did go after a coach who's not in the Big 12 championship game. It just wasn't Matt Campbell. It was Lincoln Riley. Of course, with Dave Aranda and Baylor being in the Big 12 championship game, this brings up the question, if Oklahoma had beaten Oklahoma State last night to go to the Big 12 championship game, knocking Baylor out, would we be sitting here right now with Dave Aranda being the next head coach at USC? It certainly elicits the question. Now, maybe Mike Bohn had Lincoln Riley lined up all along. This was the unbelievable stealth operation. And obviously that's true. Like, that's the case regardless. But he wouldn't have been able to do this today if Oklahoma was in the Big 12 championship game. So it's just a magnificent plot twist. It's like the NCAA tournament. The surprises are coming. You just don't know which game. You don't know which 15-2 upset to expect. And that's what this was. Like, you knew that Mike Bohn was going after a Big 12 coach not in the title game. just wasn't Matt Campbell. I just find that fascinating. That's delicious.
It is fascinating. The situation that you just outlined is very plausible. All we have to do is to go back 14 years to a scenario that you know very well, that is probably the classic example where Les Miles wanted to go to Michigan. Michigan wanted Les Miles. Les Miles had a 2-loss team that backed into a national championship game, and he was tied up, and Michigan went elsewhere.
And goes to Rich Rodriguez, who, was in the rumors to be the next coach at Alabama. And how different the last 15 years of college football history would be if Rich Rod, not Nick Saban, went to Alabama.
Breaking news, everyone. Lincoln Riley leaving Oklahoma, going to USC. So the next question that I raise, Matt, is why? So here are my thoughts. Okay. Lincoln Riley's in a situation at Oklahoma that seems rather comfortable. He's achieved a high status there. They're winning 11 and 12 games every year, competing for college football playoff appearances. He's going to a less stable situation, a more precarious situation at USC in regards to how many people are going to show up at the games, what kind of resources, what kind of backing, what kind of support is going to be there, who's going to pay attention to us in the Pac-12 if the conference doesn't play a better brand of football and gain more national prestige. Just a much more unstable, uncertain situation at USC. I got to think that maybe the relationship had soured at Oklahoma, possibly. Maybe the thought of going to the SEC and being a 4th, 5th, or 6th best team in the SEC possibly didn't sit well with Lincoln Riley. Maybe the opportunity to go to the Pac-12 and be a dominant program and really cement a legacy by lifting USC back to national prominence. And maybe it was all about money.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. When it was announced that Oklahoma would go to the SEC, you'd think, okay, Lincoln Riley, an elite coach. We're going to see him against Nick Saban. We're going to see him against Kirby Smart. Oh, yes. And, so usually the big dogs, the best of the best, they want to challenge themselves against the best. So from that standpoint, first off, why would Lincoln Riley leave the SEC? But second, why would he go to LSU, when he's already going to go to the SEC? So just the idea of him leaving Oklahoma for another college program just didn't line up. Not when you're that good, not when you're that accomplished at such a young age. And you have strong national recruiting, as I mentioned earlier, that Oklahoma was certainly recruiting extremely well out west. So, the SEC angle really is the puzzling part, because I would think that, you want to challenge yourself against Nick Saban, Kirby Smart. But what are we left to think? I mean, obviously, in the Pac-12, Oregon has been the best program the past few years, no question about it. But we're seeing Oregon's not dominating. Like Mario Cristobal, he can definitely recruit, but his game day coaching, that part of the puzzle, it's not really lining up that fully. Oregon might beat Utah in the Pac-12 championship game, but unless it's like a convincing blowout, and I highly doubt that. The Ducks are really banged up for that game. Let's just say it's a really close game, kind of an ugly game. It will be clear that while Oregon will be the number 1 team in the Pac-12, it's not by any significant margin. And so this is a conference that, if USC was to recapture the Pete Carroll standard, you could also, for our older fans in the crowd, refer to it as the John McKay, John Robinson standard. If USC returns to that standard, there's no question, none, that USC is number 1. So Lincoln Riley obviously gives USC that stature, that level of standing. And I guess Lincoln Riley thought that was pretty attractive, instead of knocking heads with Nick Saban and Kirby Smart and, being the second, maybe the third best team in the SEC most years. He obviously wants that clear path to being the best in his part of the country, which, as you said, he did have at Oklahoma. 6 straight Big 12 championships, 4 straight as a head coach before finally falling short this year. That's the best answer I have. It still doesn't make sense, but that's the best answer I have under the circumstances.
We've got about 300 on the line. We've got Matt Zemek here from Trojans Wire. Please check out his work on USC football, which has become much more interesting. Matt, we joked the entire season that for being such a blue blood and such a name brand, that USC had the most boring football season of all, in their games just being meaningless and uninteresting the entire season. And now it's all flipped on its head, because this is an intriguing story, one of the biggest in college football this season, in a season of NIL, SEC expansion, and more, and a playoff format proposed at 12 teams. So just another blockbuster here with Lincoln Riley going to USC. And in amongst what you just stated goes back to a conversation that we had a number of times, where it's a little bit different at USC in regards to what is considered a home run hire, because we as college football nerds can evaluate home run hires elsewhere and say, okay, that's a great hire because this guy's an up and coming coach through the group of five, and he's really proven and he's a hot shot. But that's not going to move the radar in LA. It's not going to move the needle, where Lincoln Riley, okay, top five program, boom. He's won Big 12 championships, been to playoffs. We know that name. That moves the needle.
No question about it. I mean, he is a top five coach in college football. Like, you don't have to question that. Certainly, with like Ryan Day. Look at Ryan Day, losing to Jim Harbaugh, and you can certainly make the case. Now, I'm not saying this is like my verdict or my take, but you could make a reasonable case that Ryan Day was propped up by Justin Fields. Now, that's debatable, but we're going to see in 2022 what Ryan Day is made of. So, what Lincoln Riley's been at this for several years, again, 4 straight Big 12 titles before finally failing to win the title this year. So that's a body of work, which puts him, right under Saban and Dabo in the top 5 in college football. There's zero question about it. And the other thing is that Lincoln Riley coaches offense brilliantly. And that is something that USC had definitely lacked. Lane Kiffin showed some promise, and his 2011 season, which was ineligible for the postseason that year. USC would have been in the first Pac-12 championship game that year if it was eligible. So Lane Kiffin kind of got a raw deal there. But then 2012, USC entered the season in the preseason top 5. That was supposed to be the year Lane Kiffin put it all together. He failed to do that. So really, USC's gone a decade without an elite offensive coach, without an elite offensive profile. I mean, Sam Darnold, just due to his individual brilliance, saved Clay Helton in 2016 and 2017. But, with Lane Kiffin not really being quite ready to be a head coach 8 years ago, we're seeing now he's finally matured into being an elite head coach. USC has not had an elite, fully in command offensive coach over the past decade of misery and unfulfilled expectations. So Lincoln Riley checks that box. I mean, he fully fills that to a point where you can't question it at all. I mean, he's going to have all of the precision, the intelligence, the scheming, the play design that USC has been lacking for a long time. So Lincoln Riley's not just an elite coach. He brings the sex appeal. He brings the sizzle to a city, Los Angeles, which definitely craves that. So it just meets everything. He's also, obviously a young, telegenic, popular coach. Like there's just nothing that this hire fails to achieve. So Mike Bone, the athletic director, whom, this was going to be a career defining hire. It was going to be a defining hire in terms of, resetting the Pac-12 and giving the Pac-12 a chance to make the playoff, a chance to be a really big hitter on a national scale, with media rights negotiations coming up for the conference at the end of 2023. Boy, all eyes were on Mike Bone, and Mike Bone hit a 500-foot moonshot out of the stadium.
We always enjoy the conversation with Matt Zemek. Please check out his work at Trojans Wire. Matt Zemek at Trojans Wire. If you are watching on the USC channel, or even if you're not, so we are simulcasting on the main channel, the Oklahoma channel, and the USC channels. Please subscribe to our USC channel in particular. Pushes past 1,000 subscribers. We appreciate that, with about 400 on the line. Thank you so much for that. We see the dollar figures that have surrounded the likes of James Franklin and Mel Tucker re-signing at Michigan State and Penn State, respectively. There's a lot of speculation regarding money, and we see the figures, knowing that 8 million to 9.5 million is about that upper echelon range of college football coaches. But this is a situation where there was no speculation leading into USC hiring Lincoln Riley. So Lincoln Riley was making $7.6 million per year at Oklahoma, but we really can only guess at this point what the stipulation of the contract agreement is.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect something in that range. I don't want to just fling numbers against a wall. I'd have to imagine it would be competitive. I think the other thing is, what's going to be the budget for Lincoln Riley's staff, and is he going to, like, for instance, this is a key question: is he going to bring Alex Grinch with him from Oklahoma to Los Angeles? And it would certainly make sense because Alex Grinch was defensive coordinator under Mike Leach at Washington State. So he has very good familiarity with the Pac-12, recruiting in the West, dealing with that part of the landscape. But so that does become important. What's going to be the salary allocation for his assistants? And USC under Clay Helton fell way behind in recruiting. Oregon just hammered the Trojans on the recruiting trail. Another subplot here is going to be if Dante Williams, who was the one rock star recruiter for the Trojans, if he gets retained, and if that was part of the negotiations that Mike Bohn had with Lincoln Riley, that's going to be interesting to monitor going forward.
Matt Zemeck's on the line with us to talk USC and this blockbuster story, one of the biggest of the year in college football. Lincoln Riley leaving Oklahoma to go to USC. And of course, Lincoln Riley has had Oklahoma in the playoffs as a Big 12 champion, New Year's Six bowl bid last season, and just losing 37-33 decision in the Big 12 finale in Bedlam against Oklahoma State on the road last night. And now he opts for USC. And Matt, I got to say that it was my thought and others in looking at the USC situation, hiring Clay Helton in 2015, after Sarkisian, after Kiffin, of course, Pete Carroll being at the zenith of the sport for about 10 years, questioning the commitment to football for USC, thinking maybe they're going to hire another run-of-the-mill coach, but this has certainly dispelled that.
Yeah, and it really points to Mike Bohn. And, we've had conversations, Mark, about how, USC's decade of misery since Pete Carroll left, you can chalk it up to the bad succession of athletic directors. Mike Garrett, then Pat Hayden, then Lynn Swann. Now, what do all three of those guys have in common? They were all USC guys. They were all players at USC. They were all, internal hires, all part of the good old boy network at the school. And so Mike Bohn, an outsider, he's a Boulder guy, so he's familiar with the West, but not an insider at USC. He was hired from the outside, so he didn't have those blinders on. He didn't have those kind of cushy connections, which it was more important to get someone who could schmooze well with people around the school. No, he had a more national perspective. That was very clear from this process, and so. Mike Bohn was a mystery in terms of making a hire of this magnitude. Now, he hired Luke Fickell, but that was at Cincinnati. Just you can't compare the University of Cincinnati to USC in terms of like the pressure, the expectations, the weight, the enormity of a hire. Like this was his defining hire, not just at USC, but as an athletic director, as a college sports administrator, and he knew it. Like he's been around the block. He's not a young guy, and so he knew what the stakes were, and this just shows that having a good athletic director. I mean, and Mike Bohn had already made some decisions which were really good, but they weren't in football. Like he hired Lindsey Gottlieb, who was an assistant with the Cleveland Cavaliers. She made the Final Four at Cal in 2013. Like that was a really splashy women's basketball hire no one was expecting, but of course. It's women's basketball. It's not football. But people were certainly unsure of whether Mike Bohn was up to this task, and it was logical to be unsure. And that doesn't necessarily mean that people were expecting Bohn to fail, but we certainly didn't know if he would succeed. Like that was just up in the air. And on Saturday, I mean, you might have been following this a little bit during, along with all the other college football results, such as Michigan beating Ohio State. But you might have seen the rumors circulate that Matt Campbell had turned USC down. Like, he didn't make a public statement. And the college football insiders that we both follow, like Bruce Feldman and Adam Rittenberg and others, they didn't tweet saying Campbell had turned USC down. But that seemed to be the trajectory on Saturday afternoon, that it was trending away from Campbell. And, that kind of leads back to on Sunday afternoon, Bruce Feldman saying, oh, maybe USC could take a swing at Lincoln Riley. I mean, so it all seemed very uncertain and unstable on Sunday, but it turns out that Mike Bohn was lining up Lincoln Riley and had, a sales pitch and a package, a full presentation that clearly sold Lincoln Riley on the job. So, USC's mediocrity, again, it goes back to the athletic directors. And today we can now say Mike Bohn was up to the task. Mike Bohn immediately jumps several, if not dozens of notches, if that's possible, as a college athletic director. Like, he joins the Joe Castiglione, Barry Alvarez tier of elite college sports administrators being able to pull this off. There's no question that it is a reputation and career changing moment for Mike Bohn, and that's why USC is where it is today, right now, with Lincoln Riley.
We're pushing 600 on the line. We appreciate you being here, the voice of college football, as the breaking news just came out here in the last 90 minutes. Lincoln Riley, one of the best coaches in college football by many measurements, leaves Oklahoma to go to USC. We got Matt Zemek on the line. Check out his work at Trojans Wire. Matt Zemek at Trojans Wire. Follow him on Twitter as well. He joins me every week to talk college football, USC, the Pac-12, and the nation. Matt, what is the other dynamic involved here that is historic is I am racking my brain. I haven't had more than a couple breaths to do it, to try to figure out when there has been another time when a coach has left a blue blood program to go directly to another blue blood program. Because usually in these situations, there's an obvious ascension from a group of five to a power five, from a lower level power five to a higher power five. And now we have straight from blue blood to blue blood. That obviously makes the story doubly is big, because now the speculation is, who is Oklahoma going to hire? The first two names that come to mind. And folks, leave your comments and your questions. We got Matt for about another half hour, and I'm trying to group them together in terms of forming the conversation, because the two names that come to mind for me, and I see in the chat as well, Dave Aranda, Matt Campbell.
And that doesn't really rise to the blue blood to blue blood standard, given where Aranda and Campbell currently are. I'm trying to rack my brain too. I haven't really given that question a lot of thought, but like Mark Richt, coached at Georgia, then he went to Miami. So, but I mean, like, Miami's brand had been eroded when Richt went to Miami. So, like, he certainly wasn't going to Miami at the height of the U's powers. So, like, that's not really a clean fit. So, yeah, I mean, you're right that in terms of jumping from one blue blood to another, it's extremely rare. And that's another part of, what makes this, so remarkable, that, Lincoln Riley had, like, what more could Lincoln Riley want at Oklahoma? Like what was lacking? What was not provided for him? What was not set up on a silver platter for him to succeed, have the maximum chance of getting the best recruits? Like, his recruiting was going gangbusters. I don't follow Oklahoma with razor close, precision. I have to follow USC here, but like, I know that Oklahoma was doing really well on the trail. And of course, he had Caleb Williams coming back next year. And one would think that, Williams is going to be in 2022 what Lincoln Riley hoped Spencer Rattler was going to be this year in 2021. When Oklahoma has the elite quarterback operating at the height of his powers, which Caleb Williams might indeed be next year, that's when OU is set up to win the national title. So, like, it didn't pan out for Spencer Rattler, but it seemed likely to pan out for Caleb Williams, given everything that he did as a freshman. So, yeah, it just, like, a week later, a month later, I'm still going to be scratching my head at this turn of events and how it all came down. It's still a puzzler, and it reinforces your point about how absolutely rare this is in the larger workings of college football and college football history.
Nick Saban, Urban Meyer going from elite job to elite job, but 1 or 2 years removed based on Nick Saban going to the NFL between LSU and Alabama. Urban Meyer, of course, taking a year off between Florida and Ohio State. And other than that, Nick Saban leaving Michigan State to go to LSU, that's not blue blood to blue blood. It's a very power program at Michigan State, but more of the top 25 to 30 variety going to an LSU. And I probably should have been more clear in regards to Aranda and Campbell, not necessarily filling that question or answering that question, but in regards to filling the Oklahoma job, being candidates for that job.
Oh, absolutely, front of the line. I would say that Matt Campbell, given his offensive acumen, that's probably the. I mean, if we're going to assume that Caleb Williams will not transfer, or if we're going to assume that which coach would offer the better chance of retaining Caleb Williams and preventing him from entering the transfer portal, it's probably Matt Campbell instead of Aranda. Now, of course, if you went with Aranda, I mean, he seems like a guy who's ready to succeed at a bigger job. So, like, I don't think you could go wrong if you're Oklahoma with Aranda or Campbell. I think both are excellent choices. But I think if you want to retain Caleb Williams and you want to give Caleb Williams the best chance of succeeding next year, if that is a priority, I think that Campbell has a slight edge over Aranda as a fit for Oklahoma. But really, if Oklahoma hires Aranda, one thing that does right there is it instantly makes Oklahoma the favorite over Baylor, because Baylor's not going to come up with a better coach than Aranda, most likely. So, like, you don't have to worry about Baylor's defense anymore. You remove that piece of the chessboard. Oklahoma certainly could have used facing Baylor without Dave Aranda this year. That was the difference between the Sooners making the Big 12 championship game and not. So, like, there's no wrong answer for Oklahoma if it's Campbell or Aranda. But I think that if retaining Caleb Williams and getting the most out of him in 2022 is a centerpiece consideration, you go with Campbell first.
To your point, and to extend on it on the recruiting front, Bob Stoops was bringing in top 10 or 12 classes at Oklahoma generally. Lincoln Riley raised that bar to pushing top 5 status in recruiting at Oklahoma. And my thought was possibly he could parlay the move to the SEC, much like Texas A&M did, to make that connection. Oklahoma recruiting well in Texas, but then adding on that caveat of playing in the SEC, and again, much like Texas A&M, being able to parlay that into even greater recruiting success. Now Lincoln Riley goes to USC. I'm going to divide these questions. Don't want to throw too much at you here. Number one would be
I'm up for it. Don't worry.
Well, we'll stay on the recruiting portion of this. We know that California has incredible talent, that historically and even going to the recent past, Texas, California, Florida have pretty much filled 40% of the top 300 recruits in the nation on a consistent basis. California has dropped off considerably. And when I say considerably, I still mean it's well within the top 5. But Georgia's certainly improved, and California is losing top level prospects, both in regards to the high school products, but also they're leaving the state. So your thoughts about the state of high school football play in California right now, maybe not being quite what it's been in the past?
I see modern day highlights and other highlights of Southern California based high school programs. And I still see elite talent. I think, if you ask USC fans, if the caliber of high school football in the Southern California region has declined, I think you'll get a lot of pushback on that. I think the main thing with Clay Helton and why USC went downhill, it wasn't the caliber of talent in the area. It was two things. One, Clay Helton didn't lock down the area. He allowed Lincoln Riley and Oklahoma, among other programs, to come in and grab talent. let's remember that Ohio State's quarterback, C.J. Stroud, Clemson's quarterback, DJ Uiagalelei, and Bryce Young of Alabama, all Southern California kids. Like, so they were getting away from USC. So there's plenty of talent there. And so Clay Helton wasn't locking that down. But the other thing is Clay Helton didn't develop talent. Sam Darnold was a unique improvisational genius. That really wasn't anything that Clay Helton or his staff did. It was Darnold just having this sixth sense on the football field. And you saw that as soon as he left in 2018, everything went downhill. And you've seen the past 3 seasons, Keaton Slovis regress. Started out well in 2019, but then steadily regressed. Now, Jackson Dart, you got to give Graham Harrell, the offensive coordinator, some credit. Jackson Dart looks like the real deal, and he played a great game against BYU. And it's worth touching on this point in terms of USC and what it's capable of. USC wasn't good in the first half, but USC's second half against what is now a 10-2 BYU team ranked number 13 in the country, that was the best half the USC's played all season since the second half when it knocked out Washington State back in mid-September. And it brings up the point. Maybe after a long and difficult season, and maybe the USC players, they just weren't up for the full 3-month slog. But with this final home game against BYU, it seemed as though the players realized, okay, we're auditioning for the new head coach. So we better crank it up. Now, it's kind of a mystery why we didn't see any of this fight in any of the previous Pac-12 home games that USC played. Stanford, Oregon State, Utah, even the ugly win over a bad Arizona team. That game was close. And then, of course, the complete humiliation against UCLA. We didn't see, any fight from USC in those 5 games. But against BYU, whoa, where was this? That was a real football team that we saw against BYU. So it was as though players were realizing, oh, we better put on a good showing, for this new incoming head coach now that, an announcement's going to be coming around. I mean, I don't think the players were consciously thinking of that, but how else to explain why this team was just dead as a doornail at home all season until this BYU finale? So, that performance against BYU should be very clear. Even before Lincoln Riley was hired, I wrote very early Sunday morning that it shows that, USC can win the Pac-12 in 2022. Even after, being a 4-7 team, not going to make a bowl game, doesn't matter. You saw a good talent competing against BYU. And so now with Lincoln Riley, zero question, none, that USC is the preseason favorite in the Pac-12 for 2022. There should be no doubt in anyone's mind.
Okay. That statement basically answered my question, but I'm still going to ask it. I don't put Dabo Swinney or Jimbo Fisher in, let's say, Urban Meyer and Nick Saban's class for a few different reasons. One being, for as good as they are, Dabo Swinney has never gone anywhere other than Clemson to show that he can walk on any campus and just, bam, win immediately. Jimbo Fisher is still proving that at Texas A&M, obviously winning big in a national championship at Florida State. Meyer, Saban, they jump on any campus. They've proven throughout their history, they just win automatically. How good is the USC roster? And again, you basically answered this, but anything else on this? How good is the USC roster to expect that Lincoln Riley can step right on campus and win immediately?
Yeah, so with Jackson Dart, I mean, I look at Jackson Dart and I see a quarterback that Lincoln Riley can absolutely max out with. Dart is a dual threat, has the arm, has the moxie, can run. He can make plays. He can make throws from many different angles. So he fits kind of the modern prototype of the quarterback who, he's like a MacGyver. He has that full toolbox. Whenever he gets into a particularly tricky situation, he has an answer for it. We saw that against BYU. So like Jackson Dart, Lincoln Riley, that's a marriage made in heaven. But the other thing about this is, you would think that now that Lincoln Riley's at USC, first off, any USC recruits in the 2022 class who are thinking about leaving, whoa, maybe we might stay. So that he'll halt the exodus of recruits. And then, of course, the other thing is the transfer portal. But that is such a game changer in collegiate athletics, basketball as well as football these days, that it's kind of, it's college sports answer to free agency in the pros, that you can immediately restock a roster. You can change the complexion of what you bring to the table by loading up in the transfer portal. I mean, like I would expect plenty of Oklahoma athletes to transfer to USC. I mean, at least a few significant ones. Now, which ones I don't know, but one would think that some Oklahoma recruits who are enamored of Lincoln Riley, love playing for him, love being coached by him. They think that he's a ticket to the NFL. Seeing what he's done with quarterbacks. Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts. Certainly there's going to be some responsiveness to the things that Lincoln Riley can do for a player's career. So that certainly would mean that USC is going to do well in the transfer portal. So, given everything that you saw from that team against BYU, and I know a lot of people weren't following that game too closely. Bedlam was ending, and you had all the coaching rumor mills whirling about. But like USC showed against a good BYU team, yeah, it can compete. Like that team was dormant for 2.5 months, but it finally did show up. And so you then add transfers, and you keep the 2022 class in-house, you prevent the exodus. That should be more than enough for Lincoln Riley. Keep in mind what I've said earlier, that Mario Cristobal, certainly an elite recruiter, but Lincoln Riley should be able to run rings around him in terms of scheme and play design and all those kinds of things. That USC has, the master X and O tactician who should be able to handle whatever Mario Cristobal throws at him. Let's also point out, in terms of the balance of power in the Pac-12, Mark, John Wilner, the great journalist out at the San Jose Mercury News, probably the best journalist who covers the whole Pac-12 conference. He thinks that if Kyle Whittingham of Utah beats Cristobal in Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game, that the Rose Bowl, which Utah would make if it wins that title game, would be his last game. So you could have a coaching change at Utah, and if the Utes don't hit a home run, that clears out the Pac-12 South even more for Lincoln Riley. Arizona State's is standing pat with Herm Edwards, which makes just as much sense as Lincoln Riley to USC. It makes absolutely no sense that ASU would continue to double down on Herm Edwards with the NCAA investigation into that COVID-19 recruiting scandal. Jaden Daniels presumably is going to go pro. Maybe he stays for another year, but he hasn't had all that great a season. Like that program just seems to be dead if Herm Edwards stays for 2022. So I would be absolutely stunned, Mark, completely stunned, just as stunned as I am talking about Lincoln Riley to USC right now, if USC does not win at least the Pac-12 South next year. That should be a layup. That should be a slam dunk. That should be a 2-inch par putt. There should be absolutely no question that USC is going to win the Pac-12 South and play for the Pac-12 title next year.
Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football joins us here, and you can catch Jason. He does an outstanding job in covering Oklahoma football for us here at the Voice of College Football, and anchors our Oklahoma live show each and every Wednesday, and also our post game here at the Voice of College Football. Jason, how you doing today?
Tough question. I'm doing good. Very shocked. Honestly, there was a lot of thoughts around, Riley was very much linked to LSU. Just some unconfirmed reports over the last couple of weeks. And a lot of the things that I had heard last night and throughout Bedlam was really not pointed towards LSU. And, he all but said in the post-game press conference that he was not going to be the LSU head coach. Having said that, I don't think a lot of people maybe at least here expected the move to USC. So certainly a lot to unpack about this. But yeah, a lot of surprise going on around here right now.
Is there any reason to believe, Jason, that Lincoln Riley was unhappy or relationships had soured at Oklahoma?
I don't think so. I think Riley had some concerns, just generically speaking, from a compliance perspective. I think Oklahoma was a little tighter. There were some reports that Oklahoma would have compliance officers at practice, at weightlifting sessions, really just kind of timing them, just making sure they didn't go over. So I think that was a concern that he's had, I think, within the program. And I think just the dedication to doing what Oklahoma needs to do to kind of get over the hump, to win that national championship or play for that national championship. So from my perspective, Mark, those are the only things that I'm aware of in terms of anything that could have been, potentially soured between Lincoln Riley and Oklahoma.
So Lincoln Riley chooses to go, as Matt and I have discussed, from a historic standpoint, from blue blood program to blue blood program. And off the top of our heads, we cannot come up with another situation exactly like this one, where there was no separation between holding down 2 elite jobs back-to-back years. He goes to a situation in which you would think would be less competitive, especially since Oklahoma is moving on to the SEC. You have any thoughts about that, Jason, in regards to the daunting task of moving Oklahoma football from the Big 12 to what would be a crowded SEC?
Yeah, Mark, I think that's part of the conjecture. I think that's happening right now is maybe the thought process was, to your point, Mark, that he has maybe an easier road with Oklahoma moving to the SEC potentially as early as next year, but within the next couple of years. And so I think that's certainly part of the equation. Certainly UCLA has improved over the last couple of years, and this year being an 8-win team, I think that obviously provides some motivation from the USC side to come and bring in just a splash hire. But yeah, I don't remember, Mark. I've been trying to think of that as well, and I would think, and I know that you guys have probably done a really good job at kind of breaking this down, but I think certainly a lateral move. I don't know that you could say that USC's better than Oklahoma. I don't think that you could say Oklahoma's better than USC. So I think, it'll be interesting at some point if we hear kind of some of the underlying issues, because it's odd. I think what Bob Stoops has done, really just handing him the keys to the program just 5 years ago. And so I think it would be very, interesting just to kind of hear Bob Stoops' thought process, as well with this. One interesting thing that it's just came out that Bob Stoops is going to coach Oklahoma in the bowl game this year. So, so that's interesting. That just within the last couple of minutes as I joined here, he was actually in the meeting with Lincoln Riley when he talked to the team overall. So we just put out an article on Last Word that I did about some potential replacements for Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. And Bob he's at the bottom of the list. Wouldn't be surprised at all. It's not the first time something like that's happened. Bill Snyder's a perfect example at Kansas State. Retired, a couple years, came back and kind of kept the wheels on the bus going for a few years until his ultimate retirement. I think that's part of it. And I think, Mark, the thing that may be most prevalent about that possibility would be the fact that Bob Stoops is tremendously loyal to the University of Oklahoma. He is, anybody that watches that Fox News broadcast, he's a cheerleader for Oklahoma every single week. And I think he may have a sense of loyalty. So, hey, I handed the keys to this guy thinking that he would not only bring national championship to Oklahoma, thinking that, he would be the guy, that would be there, maybe not necessarily as long as he was, but be there in the long haul. So would not be surprised at all with him if he was the choice, that they didn't feel like that they could get, whoever maybe they wanted in a short time period. Because I know you guys were talking about recruiting. They got to get someone in there, quickly, with that early signing period happening here pretty soon in the next few weeks. It's critical that they get someone in there pretty quickly.
Matt, you know what this reminds me of, and we've got Matt for about 10 or 12 more minutes, so I want to squeeze him dry as well. And if you guys have questions for each other, certainly cut me off here, but I'll get it started by saying, Matt, you know what the Bob Stoops decision with Oklahoma to coach the bowl game reminds me of, and you as a college football historian, Barry Alvarez doing that twice with Wisconsin, where he just came back and left an AD's position for a couple of weeks just to coach a bowl game, and they were successful. So
yeah, it's the Barry Alvarez move. Yes,
I love that. I think that's phenomenal. And to Jason's point, every time a big job opens up, Bob Stoops is thrown out there as a possibility because obviously he was immensely successful. His career did not falter. He's still a relatively young man. And yeah, his name is thrown out there. So why wouldn't he, if he's going to come back to the school he loves?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be shocked, maybe a little surprised, just because of, understanding Bob Stoops. The reason why, he retired, he wanted to do some other things, and his dad died at a fairly young age, coaching really to his last breath. So I think that was part of his decision to hang it up, and I think he felt very, very comfortable that Lincoln Riley was ready to take that next step, and certainly he was. He did a really good job while he was here. I think the thought from a Bob Stoops perspective, yeah, why not? It's something that certainly wouldn't be long term, but for a couple of 2 or 3 years, ushering Oklahoma into the SEC, wouldn't be at all surprising. I think on the negative side, from a Riley perspective, not to impugn anything on him, but I think the thought process locally here in the Oklahoma area is that Oklahoma has progressively kind of went down in a downward trajectory over the last 5 years. His first year he has Oklahoma in the playoffs, should have beaten Georgia, should have went to that national championship game, and by all intents and purposes could have possibly beaten Alabama. And I think it's went downhill a little bit from there, right? They were less than competitive in the last, in those next 2 years, and then the last 2 years, last year Oklahoma not making the college football playoff for the first year under Riley, and then this year, quite frankly, I think there was some internal struggles, and then Oklahoma just didn't have a good season, just in general, for whatever reason it is, just didn't play, up to their potential. So. And then obviously not even making the Big 12 championship game. So yeah, I think it's interesting. I think this is, we can go at this from so many different angles, but I think it's probably, when you sit back and look at it, guys, I think Riley is probably a very, very natural fit for USC, and I think it's probably a great fit for both programs.
Jason, let me ask you. I mean, what do you think in terms of the staff retention for Lincoln Riley as he moves to USC? Like Alex Grinch, I mean, that's a name that's foremost on my mind in terms of whether he chooses to stay at Oklahoma, go to USC, or find another pathway. What do you sense for him and for other staffers under Lincoln Riley?
So there's one guy in particular, Dennis Simmons, he's been kind of the assistant head coach at Oklahoma. He's coached the receivers. He's been a very, very good recruiter for Oklahoma. Would not at all be surprised to see him go along with Riley. Alex Grinch is interesting. I don't have a great read on Grinch. There's been some kind of unconfirmed reports internally that there's been a little bit of strife between Grinch and Riley. Grinch, it prefers to be a little bit more physical from a practice perspective. Riley is a little bit more, shies away from that, really from a perspective of just not wanting to put any intentional injuries, save those, if those are going to happen, save those for game situations. So I don't know, don't have a great feel for that. Wouldn't be surprised if he did go, but wouldn't be surprised if he, went elsewhere or stayed. I know that he's kind of put his name in the hat for the Washington State job. Looks like and the name escapes me, the interim coach is probably going to get that job if it hasn't been announced.
He got it. Dickert is the hire there.
Okay. So yeah, wouldn't it all be surprised if he goes or stays? I mean, I think probably 50-50 from him, but I think Dennis Simmons is a guy that probably will go. I think from a strength and conditioning coach, Benny Wiley is a guy that Lincoln Riley worked with at Texas Tech and brought to Oklahoma. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes along with him as well. Those are the two guys that I can think of right off the top that would definitely see him moving on with Riley.
Welke, thank you so much for the super chat contribution. Welke sees another Stoops possibly going to Oklahoma as head coach, leaving Kentucky in the SEC.
Yeah, so thinking through this, Mark, I've got I had about 5 or 6 names on my short list, I think, and he's one of them. He's absolutely one of them. I think he would be a natural fit, especially. And I think the one thing that you have to think about with this job, Oklahoma needs someone that knows the SEC, has some familiarity with not only the recruiting aspect of it, but just kind of the daily and yearly routine within the SEC. So I think he's a name. I think Dave Aranda is a name. Hot commodity is going to be at any level. Certainly, I wouldn't be surprised if that could possibly be maybe not a war, but a back and forth between LSU and Oklahoma and Aranda. Or I mean, who knows? He's came out and talked about how much he wants to stay there. Would be a little bit surprised if he would choose to stay at Baylor if he was offered either LSU or Oklahoma. But he's another guy. One guy that I didn't think about is Joe Brady. Specifically if Oklahoma is worried about, which they should be, from a transfer portal perspective, worry about some of those recruits flipping. One specific recruit who's already hinted, Rayleigh Brown, kind of a running back wide receiver out of the California area. I think there was a little bit of concern with him just in general. He's already kind of hinted on Twitter that he may be following. Caleb Williams is a guy that I would be a little bit surprised if he stays at Oklahoma. Unfortunately, I mean, I would like to see him stay, but he is very, very pro Riley. This is a guy that when Oklahoma was originally recruiting Brock Vandegrift, who actually ended up decommitting from Oklahoma and going to Georgia, that Caleb Williams is willing to come to Oklahoma as a walk-on. He had that much desire to play for Oklahoma, to play for Riley. So I think that's one of those things. I would be a little bit surprised if Caleb stays, which puts Oklahoma in an absolutely horrific position at the quarterback position next year. So yeah, I think those are some of the big things to think about. Him from a recruiting perspective might be able to do that. And then, of course, we talked about Mark Stoops. Matt Campbell's a name that's kind of been floated around here from Iowa State. Just has done an incredible job over the last few years there. Of course, we talked about Bob potentially coming back as well. And it's kind of interesting, looking at this, I think all of the collective Oklahoma fans around the world were just banging their table because Adam Schefter had reported that Oklahoma has already reached out to Cliff Kingsbury but as a potential replacement. And I think everybody would just knock their head sideways if that would be because it's the same person, right? I mean, essentially he's he's an offensive guy. He's kind of a laid back, really kind of a California guy, I mean, so to speak, and so I think Oklahoma, the direction that I would see that Oklahoma goes into is more of a kind of a tougher, more of kind of maybe a disciplinarian, kind of a defensive first guy to bring some of that back, because I think there's some thoughts that Oklahoma's gotten a little soft over the last couple of years.
Interesting. Okay, let me catch up with a couple super chats. And again, Matt, we appreciate your time and we honor your time. So just duck out whenever you need to, but we'll take you as long as we can have you.
Just if you have a final question for me.
Yeah, let's do that. Well, not necessarily a final question. Is there anything that we did not touch upon? I think we covered it pretty well, but are there any final thoughts from you about USC and Oklahoma going forward?
Well, I just think that, USC is ready to reclaim the Pete Carroll standard. And I mean, I was not prepared to say that for Matt Campbell or even Dave Aranda. I mean, I was impressed by them. I think they would have been great gets for USC, but I was not ready to say, Pete Carroll, 2.0 is coming at you. But with Lincoln Riley, yes, I think there's very little question that USC is ready to be at that Pete Carroll standard for the next several years. I think that's really the main surface takeaway in terms of what the future holds for USC.
Hey, everyone. Once again, please follow Matt on Twitter, Matt Zemek. It's just MattZemek, Matt Zemek. We'll pull up the banner right here and follow his work on Trojans Wire. Does a tremendous job there. Helps me out tremendously each and every week as we get together to talk USC, the Pac-12, and the nation. Matt, we appreciate you stopping by. I have so much that we know that you need to follow up on as you continue your follow up on this story that is a huge one. Thank you so much, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Mark, and thanks for all you do for Trojans Wire. Appreciate it.
All right, Jason, we will get back to it here. Let me post another super chat here before we continue the conversation. Hey, Tim, thank you so much for your contribution here. We appreciate that. Fight on. It's been hard being a Trojan in this channel. I'm sure it has. It's not been the standard that Pete Carroll continued from decades past. But wow, what a hire. Jason, I started out the conversation with Matt by basically stating, in this information age where it seems as though there are no secrets because everything can be found out, everything can be tracked, somebody's going to find out everything. And even the most outlandish coaching hires or proposed hires are thrown out there by somebody. This was one that just blindsided everyone, basically, up until today.
You know, it really did, Mark. And there was, like we've talked about a little bit on our channel, there was some, just some unconfirmed reports that, maybe he was flirting with LSU and LSU was flirting back a little bit, but nothing real confirmed by any kind of, reputable media outlet. Just, and it ended up, I think, being more message board rumor than anything else. But no, yeah, it was completely surprising to me, especially after his commentary last night in the post game after the Bedlam game. Talked about, he said, someone asked him, the first question was about LSU, and he said, let me get this out of here quickly and immediately. I'm not going to be the next head coach at LSU. Like I said, little did we know it would be another 3-letter university that he's moving to. And he was very adamant last week about how much he enjoyed being at the University of Oklahoma, how much he considers this home, family. So I think I don't know how much of a NBA fan that you are, Mark, but I think this, based on some of the things that I'm hearing kind of internally here, this is rivaling the Kevin Durant leave from Oklahoma City to Golden State. There's a lot of upset people, I think, and I think a lot of people, the consensus is people understand if someone's moving to maybe a better situation for themselves financially or a better situation for them coaching. But I think, on top of him, Riley being very adamant about, not wanting to go anywhere else, and being very adamant about, Oklahoma's the place to be, and not really hinting at this to really anyone. So I think there's a lot of, maybe hurt people obviously watching this, but are just understanding, just kind of going through this news. But yeah, it's a big, it's a big ripple effect here, just understanding. And I think one of the things that Matt mentioned in this day and age, or maybe it was you talking about the transfer portal in recruiting right now, is big. I think to a certain degree, Riley can kind of pick and choose the guys that he wants to take with him, right? If he can have these conversations with some of these kids and say, I know there's a little bit of, I know that tampering is not necessarily a thing as at the same level that it is, it is at the next level and through professional sports. But I think conceivably that could be a possibility. Sorry, I'm just reading the comment. It's just incredible. I wondered how long the Herman name, it would take for the Herman name to come up. But I think, like I said, I think it would be very interesting. And right now, it's not like Oklahoma can afford to take their time. I think Oklahoma has to be very aggressive with this, and more than I do. I'm trying to remember signing day. When is signing day? Mid
December 15th.
15th.
It's
So
the 15th. It's the middle Wednesday of the month, December 15th this year. Yep.
So you literally have less than 3 weeks to figure out who's your coach, and then do just a great job at contacting these recruits and keeping some of these guys here. Not only your recruits, but your players inside the program. That's why I even mentioned, if this would have happened, Mark, in July or August, wouldn't even wouldn't even have mentioned Bob, but the fact that he's coaching them and which was a little surprising to me, the fact that he's coaching them in the bowl game, and the fact that Oklahoma doesn't have a whole lot of time, would not be incredibly surprised if that happened.
We have about 1,400 folks on the line, so there's obvious interest in this. We appreciate everybody stopping by. We're simulcasting on the main channel, the Oklahoma channel, and the USC channel, and want to let everyone know that Jason and I kick around Oklahoma football every Wednesday at 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 Central, and we have slightly less than 1,400 on the line for those shows. So if you want to stop by and join us for some conversation there on Oklahoma football, we will, of course, continue this conversation at that point. To the point, Jason, you just made, this is just monumental, and I've got a pretty good grasp on college football history.
Yeah.
The best parallel we could come up with, and it doesn't rival this one, is Mark Richt a few years ago leaving Georgia and immediately going to Miami. Now, I don't know if you were on the line when I mentioned Urban Meyer and Nick Saban going from blue blood to blue blood, but it was separated by an NFL stint for Saban and a year off for Urban Meyer. So unless somebody else can find the example in college football history of a coach going from blue blood to blue blood, and I mean top of the line, there's only a few of these jobs. In my estimation, in my perspective, it's Oklahoma, USC, Texas, Ohio State, Alabama, Notre Dame, Michigan, and maybe you can throw in a few other ones of more recent fame, but it's a short list. So this just doesn't happen. So unless you had something to say about that, Jason.
No, no, you're right. It doesn't. It doesn't. And I think I don't know about you, but I think your thoughts are much more interesting, I think, from the outside looking in. But for me, I think it's the most interesting thing about this is really just understanding. For me, what's the motive here? What is? It's clear that this has been in the works for a couple of weeks, right? There's been some discussion and negotiation. Is it money? Is it Oklahoma wasn't willing? I would assume, and I don't know. I don't think any of the terms have come out yet. Probably tomorrow we'll hear that, but I would assume it's probably anywhere from the 8.5 to 10 million range. I would guess. Specifically what Mel Tucker got, 96 million, 95 million for 10 years. So I would assume that it's somewhere in that range. So is it money? Is it issues internally within the program at an administration level? Is it the SEC, the concern, that doesn't feel like that they're ready to make that move to the SEC, whether it be next year or a couple years from now? I think that we may never find out why, but I think that's the most interesting. I think that's the most interesting thing about this is really just understanding the why.
Yeah, we delved into that to a certain extent, but just to extend on that point and kind of run down the typical list, most of the folks watching and taking part in this conversation, you have your career aspirations, you evaluate jobs, you've probably left jobs to go to other jobs. And why do you leave? Well, first and foremost would be money. People work to make money. So if there's a significant upgrade there, Brett Bielema comes to mind, leaving Wisconsin, which could be considered a better job, at least at that time, than Arkansas. But Arkansas threw him like almost $2 million more per year. Mm-hmm. So he made a money move. That's reasonable. That makes sense. Nothing to be ashamed of there. Okay. What we see more readily also in the coaching profession is these guys have egos. They want to build a legacy. They want to be seen in a certain light. So they typically take a more prestigious job. Well, that's not the case here. But that's the obvious ascension. Right. Tom Herman leaves Houston to go to Texas. Kevin Sumlin leaves Houston to go to Texas A&M. That's the obvious ascent that you see all over the place with coaches. They want to go where they can work with better athletes to achieve more, to be recognized more, make more money, build a legacy, and work at the top of their profession. But again, that's absent here. So is it a combination or just one of the following? Money, the ability to win and own a conference, much like Oklahoma's owned the Big 12, and Lincoln Riley seeing that opportunity most likely slipping away in a crowded SEC versus what could be accomplished, especially at USC in the Pac-12. It's really a unique situation from this standpoint. Pick your team in whatever conference, and they pretty much own that conference. And I know my Ohio State analogy is going to be outdated by one day. They don't own the Big 12 or the Big 10 anymore, but Oklahoma in the Big 10, that's out, or in the Big 12, that's outdated by one day as well. Clemson in the ACC, but they don't have the recruiting ownership of an area like USC can potentially have and has had in the past in a great place to recruit, Southern California. They don't have that direct, okay, we are the flagship school in the entire conference, and we're located right where all the players are. It's just built for winning and owning a conference.
It is, and I think, Mark, the more we talk about it, I think maybe that's the biggest factor. I mean, to your point, as good as Lincoln Riley, probably the best thing that he's brought to Oklahoma is how, obviously, outside of the way he is an offensive mind and has, kind of brought Oklahoma even a little bit further from where they were, traditionally, even under Heupel and Kevin Wilson and a lot of different offensive coordinators that they've had over the last 15, 20 years. But the recruiting aspect is where they've brought Oklahoma higher than they've been in quite some time, since the early 2000s when Bob was there. But I think, to your point, Mark, how much easier it is to recruit to Southern California than it is to Norman, Oklahoma, right? I mean, you don't, the amount of effort that you have to put out from an Oklahoma perspective when you're battling Texas, when you're battling Texas A&M, and then now going into the future, and even to a certain extent over these last couple of years, battling Alabama, battling Georgia, battling Ohio State for some of these recruits. Yes, you're still going to battle some of those teams. At the same time, you have the advantage in being right there in their back door, knowing, especially from an offensive perspective. So, I mean, I think if there's anything else that's kind of came through this conversation, I think, Mark, I think I lean to where you are at in terms of maybe the biggest kind of, and it may be a combination of a lot of factors, but I think the biggest factor might be the ease from a recruiting perspective and the ability to be at USC, your ability to challenge for not only a Pac-12 championship, but a playoff berth, almost every single year in and year out. As Matt said, I mean, I think the expectations are going to be very, very high day one, going into feeling like you can compete and win a Pac-12 championship immediately. And then, if you're there, then obviously you have an opportunity to get to a playoff. I mean, I think it helps, it would have helped to have maybe a lot more of, in the past, Washington's made it I think Washington's the only team in the, if I'm not mistaken, in the college football era to make the playoff from the Pac-12, but Oregon was right there. We've had
Oregon the first year.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. No, I think I think the opportunity is much easier. I mean, I think one could say maybe that kind of goes to Lincoln's personality, maybe more than anything else. But yeah, I think that's a big factor in why he's decided to make this move.
FTW, thank you so much for the super chat contribution. And to further the point of this being a landmark move, you have added to the Mark Richt Georgia to Miami transition with Jimbo Fisher, Texas A&M to Florida State. So that's a valid answer. But sorry, Texas A&M, sorry, Florida State, you are not USC or Oklahoma. Now, Florida State has been USC/Oklahoma since roughly 1980. So they have elevated themselves to that level, much like Miami did for years, to a certain extent, much like Clemson has in recent years. But historically, blue blood, Florida State is not, and Texas A&M, despite all the resources and the money and the rabid fan base and packing out Kyle Field to 105,000, they're trying to get there. They got all the window dressings of an elite program, but the results on the field aren't anywhere close to elite status.
No, you're right. I mean, and I think the list that you threw out there is valid. You have Oklahoma, you have Texas, you have Alabama, you have I'm trying to remember who all you mentioned: Michigan, Ohio State, USC. Obviously there's some more. There's some that are borderline. You can debate whether or not they're a blue blood, and like Florida State's a good example. Yeah, they've been pretty good. I mean, not recent, but since the since the 90s, obviously. Nebraska's one that you could make an argument, or they at one point they were absolutely a blue blood in the 90s and early 2000s, but can you really consider them being a blue blood right now? I mean, you go 3-9 and you bring your coach back. So I mean, maybe that tells you more than anything whether or not they're a blue blood or not. But I think Georgia's another one that's in that conversation as well.
Penn State.
Yeah, Penn State, obviously.
There's some fringe teams, LSU. Yeah. Yep.
But I think that at the end of the day, when you look at even a team like USC or Oklahoma, based on what they have going for them, just in terms of the facilities that they have, just recruiting specifically at USC, but even at Oklahoma, unless you just bring in someone that is completely incompetent at the head coaching position, you're going to be marginally successful, right? But I think for Oklahoma, we've talked about this. The monster needs to be fed to a certain degree, right? We've talked about Oklahoma's aspirations this year was at the very least to make a conference championship. To make the national championship game. And not only they're not a playoff team, they're not even making the Big 12 championship game. So I think, like I said, there's so many intriguing factors of this. And talking about blue bloods, I mean, we had talked about this all year about chaos. How weird is it going into next week that Oklahoma, Ohio State, and Clemson aren't even playing? Like it's something that I've not been able to shake over the last 12 hours. That's the reality of what we're facing right here. But yeah, I think with those teams, I mean, and Oklahoma like I said, it's been an incredibly disappointing year for Oklahoma this year in so many ways. Just starting game one and just continued to resurface almost each and every game this year. So I mean, you have to wonder, obviously, in the back of your mind how committed Lincoln Riley was here at the end of the season. It's impossible. I mean, I think you share my faith, and it's hard to serve two masters, right? And so when you have one foot out the door and you have 1 foot game planning, it's hard to be. But credit to him, and how you led this off, his ability to keep this quiet, and this was quiet for as long as it was. I mean, it's credit to him for being able to do that. So I think where Oklahoma goes from here is going to be really, really. It's all hires are important, but I think it's going to be extremely important ushering Oklahoma into the SEC, and based on where Oklahoma is at nationally right now.
Folks, we've been at this for about 75 minutes. We appreciate you being here, and we've had quite a crowd here. So thank you so much for your contributions, both in the live chat, just being here, your contributions through the super chat. Keep in mind that for however long we go, once we end the live stream, certainly watch what you've missed. So just wait for about 15 or 20 minutes. The video will process and post, and you can watch what you missed. Got a comment coming in from Emmanuel who says, great job, Mark, for covering the ground at breaking news. Last time USC was at the top, they blew the doors off a highly touted OU program. Of course, he's going to the 2004 BCS championship game.
Yeah.
Lincoln Riley could replicate Pete's SC run.
And it was funny that you mentioned that, because I saw a tweet or someone says that, that USC hasn't killed the hopes and dreams of Oklahoma fans since 2005. So kind of brought me back to that. But no, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think the difference is, I think there's a lot of Oklahoma people that are kind of about this one way or the other. As I mentioned, fair or otherwise, I think, there, to a certain degree, there is the factor that you have to consider of be careful what you wish for. There's been a lot of programs that think that they're better than they are, and then they go, and I mean, how many times have we talked about Nebraska? They thought they were better than Solich, and then look what has happened since then, right? There's been, a lot of different programs have done that over the years. So I think there's an element that you have to consider to the be careful what you wish for. But on the same token, I think there's some thought process that Oklahoma has, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, Oklahoma has gone down a little bit just in the minds of people. I don't know about nationally, but I think locally, when you look at their trajectory, has kind of gone in a that negative spin, so to speak, just from national perception of where they're at. I mentioned the Georgia game in their very first year. Had a chance to win that game, and by all intents and purposes should have won that game. They lose that game. They play the next year. They play Alabama in the playoff, and really the final score was a 14-point margin, but wasn't incredibly competitive in that game. And then the next year, LSU was not competitive at all in that game. And then last year, Oklahoma doesn't make the playoffs, and then this year, they're not even winning a Big 12 championship, and probably relegated to the Alamo Bowl, maybe even the Cheez-It Bowl, based on what happens with Oklahoma State and Baylor, and if Oklahoma State gets to the playoffs. So which I think would be interesting in itself. There's a lot of moving parts to this. I mean, how interesting would it be if Oklahoma lands in the Cheez-It Bowl, and you have Oklahoma probably facing Clemson? Brent Venables is a guy that's probably going to get a call. I would guess he's a guy that's going to, at the very least, get an interview. And you have Bob Stoops, his former head coach. I think that would be an interesting, just from a drama perspective. But yeah, that trajectory has gone down, especially based on where Oklahoma was at preseason. I think a lot of us thought Oklahoma had a very good chance to challenge for a national championship, and through the course of the year, you could make the argument that Oklahoma wasn't even playing like a top 15 to 20 team. So I think a lot of that has soured a few people. Some few people internally, in terms of if Riley's able to be the guy. So I don't know. It's a little bit of a amicable in terms of from a breakup perspective. So, but I think it will all, like I said, it'll all be considered. I'll be kind of considering who Oklahoma is able to get as that next head coach.
Folks, we got Jason Ray here from Last Word on College Football. We get together every Wednesday to talk Oklahoma, 11:30 Central every Wednesday morning. So please join us then. We will continue this conversation, of course, and not knowing at that point who Oklahoma will be playing in a bowl game, because we will have the conference championship games coming up Saturday. OU and Baylor, of course, two teams that beat the Sooners this year, to give us a bit of a surprise for the Big 12 championship game this year. I don't want to derail the Oklahoma talk, but we have filled this up with 80 minutes of Lincoln Riley and OU and USC. But you got my wheels spinning, Jason, on the playoff. For as much as both you and I have rooted for chaos,
it's here, baby. It's here.
I guess maybe I should have tempered my rooting and praying interest in chaos, because I don't know if this is going to strike you the same way as it does me, but let's say Georgia lays waste to Alabama and clears out Alabama. I think if they win close, I think there's going to be some push in that room for Alabama to stay in the top 4. But let's say they lay waste to Alabama. So it's just clear Alabama's out. Iowa beats Michigan. And let's say Cincinnati pulls through and they win. I'm not even going to try to create more chaos by saying they lose. I'm just creating what could potentially be a pretty, ugly playoff if Georgia doesn't have to face an Alabama and Ohio State in the playoff, and it's Georgia, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State, Notre Dame.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying there. It would be
some bad football.
It would be ugly. Yeah,
and I'm not taking a shot at those 3 programs because what they would accomplish in going to the playoff is well earned and deserved. But Georgia just might be that good, and we tend to see in the playoff the supreme elite talent really max out.
Yeah, we really do. I mean, I would be, over the last month, I have kind of increasingly had less and less faith that Alabama could beat Georgia. I'm at the point where I would be surprised if they win. I would be really shocked.
They barely beat Auburn.
Yeah, I mean, and they needed. No, absolutely. I watched, and there was some great football yesterday, but watching every second of that game, if Auburn had anything on the offensive side of the ball, if they didn't have a one-legged quarterback for half of that game, and if I think Bigsby just slides as opposed to going out of bounds, then Alabama probably has a loss, and it's it's not anything to talk about. So, but yeah, no, I mean, that's very interesting. I mean, I don't think any of those things that you've mentioned are outside of the realm of possibility whatsoever. Michigan has put so much into winning that game Saturday. You wonder, I mean, you wouldn't expect them to have a hangover in a conference championship game with a spot, with an opportunity to go to the playoff, but at the same time, they put so much effort and so much into that game. You've got to think that there's at least a possibility of them being maybe a little bit flat against Iowa. And then, I mean, Iowa's been pretty bad offensively over the last. So maybe it's a team that they're not incredibly excited to go play. So I could see that. But yeah, in the Oklahoma State Baylor situation would be weird. I mean, you didn't even mention this. If Baylor were to beat Oklahoma State, what does that look like? But you're right. You're Fighting Irish just find a way to keep staying relevant in this conversation. There was, a couple weeks ago, I thought there was no chance whatsoever that that Notre Dame's gonna find their way into the playoffs because of they don't have this extra game, and they've just kind of been beating up on Stanford, beating up on Georgia Tech, beating up on some of these teams that aren't very good at all. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be very, very intriguing. And I'm with you. I think that would be, I mean, obviously it's watchable, but I don't, you have to think that Georgia would just, kind of win a national championship easily in that way. But, I think at the same time, Alabama has had the psychological advantage over Georgia, much like Ohio State did over Michigan, much like Oklahoma has over Oklahoma State. And, we see how those games turned out this weekend. So yeah, it's going to be good football to watch this weekend. I'm excited about it, even though Oklahoma is out of it. Just it feels weird, but yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. I was surprised at Michigan. I really was. I was surprised at how well. I mean, it was Ohio State and Oregon all over again. Ohio State's inability to stop the run. I mean, and they had Ohio State. It was marginally successful in the first half, but the second half, they didn't. I think Michigan scored on every possession that they had. I think, and then obviously Haskins had the 5 touchdowns. But yeah, I mean, how funny it is that things change. I mean, Cincinnati is a it's a virtual lock to make the playoffs if all they have to do is win at this point, right? I mean, it could be a little tricky, I guess, if Alabama were to win for them, and then Oklahoma State's pretty convincing, and Michigan wins. I mean, it could be a little tricky, I guess, at that point. But I think the thing that Cincinnati has over them, their only competition really is going to be Notre Dame, and you would have to assume at that point that the head-to-head matters. But I mean, with the way this committee is, we never know.
Think about this, Jason. Iowa got off to this great start based on defense and special teams. They mid-season lost to Purdue by 3 scores, and they were wiped out by Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't score. Even when now that they've rebounded, they beat a pretty good Minnesota team. Scored 22 straight to beat Nebraska, but those are not great teams, Minnesota and Nebraska. And that's basically what's gotten them back on track. They're a 10-2 team. They're playing for a Big Ten championship. This college football playoff scenario is such, you don't have to go through crazy algorithms to get Iowa in there. It's a narrow path.
Yeah.
But if Georgia wipes out Alabama, basically Iowa just needs either Cincinnati out of the way via Houston or Oklahoma State out of the way as a 1-loss Big 12 champion, and they can go to the playoff with a Big 10 championship and an 11-2 record. You got to think that the Big 12 champion or the Big 10 champion, even though Iowa's behind Baylor now, is going to get a lot of leverage in that room over a Big 12 champion, especially if Michigan's number 2 this week and Iowa beats them.
That's interesting, Mark. I didn't even consider that. So where's Iowa sitting at right now? 16, 17, somewhere in that neighborhood?
I think they were 16 in the playoff rankings. Yes.
So yeah, like I said, I didn't even consider that. It's kind of funny that you mentioned this, because I don't know how much you watched of the Bedlam game. They had that graphic. Who was the lowest ranked team on the last weekend to make it at 6? So we could have a situation where we go from 6 to 16. So you think, interesting. And I'm not disputing this without a doubt, but you think a 10 or it would be 11-2 at this point. Iowa Big Ten champ with 2 losses would get in. Even over Notre Dame with 1 loss, even over maybe even an Ole Miss. I mean, I know it just from an SEC perspective over I know they have the 2 losses, but yeah. I mean, I don't see it happen. I don't think they would get in over an Oklahoma State.
No,
if they beat Baylor.
No, I don't think so either.
But outside of that, I mean, if that situation were to happen exactly as you mentioned, and I think that the only challenge would be Notre Dame, would be again a 2-loss Baylor team if they were to beat Oklahoma State right there. I mean, I think that's an interesting conversation as well, right? If Baylor beats Oklahoma State, avenges their only loss. I know they have a horrible loss against TCU, but yeah, I hope. I mean, I don't have a dog in the fight, so yeah, I hope it happens.
It would be fascinating to see the committee squirm on that one.
It would be, absolutely.
And the networks probably not be too happy about Iowa and or Baylor being in their playoff.
Definitely.
But for right now, it's Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma to USC. And again, I want to remind anyone who's just watched the last few minutes that we exhausted this topic pretty well for about 75 to 80 minutes with Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football. We had Matt Zemek, who covers USC with Trojans Wire. Jason, certainly if there's anything else to cover I'm not coming up with anything else necessarily in the live chat, but I will give it another good look because as you guys will know that join us on a regular basis, that we scan the live chat and we make sure that we get to your comments and questions. I will start with this before I review the live chat. Number one, that we did get a super chat in from Groon. Groon D, thank you so much for that. Appreciate that. Groon's got nothing to say, but thank you so much for the contribution. When you read the Tom Herman question mark comment, I got to think that that would not sit well with Oklahoma fans. Not only is he a former Texas coach, but a unsuccessful Texas coach.
Yeah, no, I would. No, I mean, I think a Cliff Kingsbury thing would happen before something like that. I mean, I think heck, as bad as he got treated, Sark has done way worse in 1 year than what Tom Herman has done. So, no, I mean, I think, and of course, there's going to be some candidates, and I'm sure there's something that comes, out of the woodwork. But I think, there's probably about 8 or 9 names right now that I see Urban Meyer. I don't think that would ever be, even if he had any interest in coming back, I don't think that would be a good fit. Of course, you probably wouldn't tell him no, obviously, but I think it would be that would be pretty far fetched. I think I think you have I think you have Dave Aranda for me would be there at the top. I think a guy like Matt Campbell would be there at the top. Then I think you've got I think you've got Joe Brady as a guy that Oklahoma might look to. I think you've got a guy like Brent Venables that might get a look. Luke Fickell is a guy that I mentioned, in our article. The thing about Fickell is I can't imagine, even if he was interested, I can't imagine him leaving when Oklahoma needs him to leave. In the midst of them potentially making the playoffs, I can't imagine him leaving. So I think that might not necessarily be a great fit from a timing perspective, but. And those are Mark Stoops is another guy just from an SEC perspective, I think, as well. There's a lot of, and I think a lot of people may understand this, but there's a lot of thoughts. And I think initially Josh Heupel is a guy that people would think, oh, as successful as he's been at Tennessee, the bridge has pretty much been burned between Oklahoma and Heupel. Heupel was very disgruntled about being fired by Bob Stoops when Bob kind of raided that staff a little bit there in the mid 2010s, and so I think there's a lot of probably anger there, animosity between both. So it'll be interesting, and of course there'll be some names, and hopefully, like I said, I think this will be something, Mark, that I would expect it to happen relatively soon. I think if we go a week and a half, 2 weeks here without Oklahoma naming someone, I think that probably points to maybe Bob taking over for the time being from a temporary situation. So it'll be interesting. Maybe I'm hopeful that we'll have a lot to talk about, at least more details about this and just in general on Wednesday.
Yeah, you would think very shortly Lincoln Riley will be announced at USC, and we'll see how transparent he is about answering the questions concerning his move and the motivation involved. Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma to USC, again, unless somebody can come up with another example throughout the annals of college football history, there's been nothing like it. Not Jimbo Fisher from Texas or Florida State to Texas A&M. I saw a Brett Bielema comment from Wisconsin to Arkansas. Again, not at the level of USC and Oklahoma. Jason and I will be online Wednesday at 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 Central to talk Oklahoma football. And it's all about Lincoln Riley, and it's more forward thinking about who's going to be the next coach of the Sooners. Jason, we always appreciate you. Catch Jason's work at Last Word on College Football. He gives his short list of Oklahoma candidates, and check out the work, yes, across the board with Jason at Last Word on College Football. Jason, we appreciate you being here as always, man.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Mark. I appreciate it.